Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is another book review, kind of a roundup of the books that I've been reading over the last couple of months. So I've got 9 books. So I'm still doing pretty well with my reading. It's really picked up in the last few months. So I'm just going to try and like whiz through them quickly because I tend to ramble on and it doesn't make any sense anyway, so I may as well do it quickly. So here is my stack. So I have some notes as well which I wrote really in a rush with a pen that is illegible, so that's really going to help, I think. Anyway, so this is Motherhood by Sheila Heti from 2018. I do think it has quite a nice kind of watercolour design on this version of the book's cover, although this one is in this like weird plastic cover because it's an ex-library book. This book is weird. I think when I bought it I thought it was a fiction book, but it's like a non-fiction book, which presumably is the author's genuinely trying to work out whether or not she should have children or try to have children. But she uses like rolling dice, like rolling some dice to see if it's heads or tails to answer questions throughout the book, which I didn't understand. Like they just didn't make sense to me, and they didn't seem to be directly related to having children. And it spans a few years of her life, and then I guess at the end she decides not to. I don't know. I did Google it afterwards and she doesn't seem to have any kids. It just didn't make any sense to me, and I just didn't really care like whether she had kids in the end. Moving on from that to a parenting book called The Parenting Map, by, it just says Dr. Shefali. I think she's called Dr. Shefali Tsabary. I may not be pronouncing her name correctly because I've only heard her be called Dr. Shefali. That's how she's kind of got more of a following, especially online, I think. I heard her do a TED Talk, I realised, ages ago, and had kind of forgotten about it, and then when I had seen her picture and heard her voice, because she has this amazing voice, it jogged my memory, and that I'd kind of liked what she'd said then, but that was absolutely ages ago, before I'd had children. Parenting Map, she talks about, so she's written other books, especially about being a conscious parent and conscious parenting. I've not read any of those other books. Conscious parenting just seems really like gentle parenting, which is what all my other books are about. And this was her, apparently, a step-by-step guide, so more practical, but to me it was not super practical. That there wasn't enough in it of day-to-day stuff, and it's just really similar to like all the other parenting books that I've read. So I mean, it wasn't bad, but it didn't really do anything, you know, for me. Then I read this book which has the absolute worst cover that has ever been created ever. It's called Outraged, Why Everyone is Shouting and No One is Talking, by Ashley Dotty Charles. It's actually a really short book. I could have done with being longer. It's not even 140 pages long. Yeah, I do think it could have done with being a bit longer because it doesn't really seem like she had the space or the time to really go into this subject in depth. So the book is about how everyone is getting outraged now about absolutely everything. So some of the examples that she gives are Jamie Oliver, British TV chef, creating a jerked rice, which is not an authentic Jamaican dish, and he is also not from that culture. And also H&M selling a t-shirt that said something like cheeky monkey or something on it, and then the model is for a child, and the model was a black child. As well as there's a few other things that she mentions, but she talks about how when she first saw that as a person of colour in particular, she just laughed and thought it was kind of cute, but everyone else online seemed to be getting super outraged about it. So she talks about how at one point outrage was used to make social change, and now it's just something that you can be outraged about online very quickly and then not really do anything else afterwards. It's kind of an interesting idea. I do think that she doesn't really give like a lot of space then for people's feelings, because at the end of the book she kind of says like, stop being outraged by stuff, and it's like, well, it's not necessarily that easy for people if you do feel genuinely upset about it. But like I said, it's just such a short book, so I don't know if it ever really got going for me. I thought it would be better than it was. Interesting to move on from that book to this book. So this is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. This is from 2021, so it's quite a recent book. It's another one with a kind of an odd structure, so it's like lots of little passages, and there isn't really a clear narrative story arc, but it is fiction. It's split into two, and the first half is really about this woman who has become like lost in the portal being like Twitter or social media, or maybe just the whole internet, but it does seem to be more like a specific social media. I think it's just Twitter, really. And so, you know, it is focused more on that. And then the second half of the book, it follows the same kind of structure, the same kind of like just little like passages, moving from one idea to another, but then something happens in the woman's personal life, which is, I found quite unexpected and actually like really quite upsetting. Like, it's quite an upsetting thing that happens, which just changes like her and her attitude a bit more, I think, to just everything. No, it's an interesting book. It's also not very long, but I think it has more to say than perhaps the Outraged book, or maybe it just worked more for me, I don't know. But I find it quite hard to like give a review of that book without totally spoiling it, but also because of the narrative structure of it, I don't know, my brain can't put together how to explain what it's about. So not helpful. From that I went on to The Garden of Evening Mists by Twang. So this book is from 2011, and it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize of 2012. This one has been sitting on my shelf for ages, and I finally got around to reading it. It's got a very nice gold spine. This book is really good. It's really good, really interesting, really sad in parts. It really exposed my lack of knowledge to mid-20th century Asia and what was happening in Asia. So the main character returns to Malaya, now known as Malaysia, from Kuala Lumpur, where she was a judge, and now she's retired. And then she looks back, she's remembering what happened when she was younger, when she was taken to a internment camp, I guess a prisoner of war camp, by the Japanese army, and you know what a horrible, brutal experience it was. And her sister died there, and everyone else in the camp died, and she was the only person that escaped. And then also her subsequent relationship with a Japanese gardener, and just what all of that kind of meant to her, and also learning more about him now, several decades later, and realising that she may not have actually known some quite important things about him, but that she doesn't really get a full answer. But there's a few different characters that are kind of introduced that also have experienced like horrible things. The conclusion being, you know, there's like a Japanese soldier that had just a horrible experience in the war as well, and then she was interned by the Japanese, and then there's some, I don't know, everyone had a horrible time, basically, to summarise. But that's actually a really good book. So this next one is really short again. That was why it appealed to me. Three Men in New Suits by J.B. Priestley from 1945, so going back in time a bit. This one was just one that my mum gave to me, and I recognised J.B. Priestley because at school we did an Inspector Calls, which is a book by J.B. Priestley, or maybe a play. I think it might be a play by him. So I thought I would just I'd try it out, and then when I saw how short it was, I thought I would read it. And it surprised me that I actually enjoyed it and quite liked it. It's just about 3 men who have been demobbed or have come home from the army after World War II and then returned back to their home village, and they're all from the different classes but then ended up in the same unit, whatever, team in the army, and so have like quite a close friendship now. But they return home with certain expectations about what home will be like. You know, they've been dreaming about it for so long, but when they actually get back, it's not quite as they remembered. Things have changed, and maybe not for the better. Again, it's quite short, and it's not perfect. You know, towards the end of the book, there's a lot of people making speeches that just don't seem very natural. If he had stopped doing it, if that wasn't in it, then I think it would have been really great, but it just lost me a bit towards the end. But I still quite liked it more than I thought I would. Moving on to a book that I liked a lot less than I thought I would. This is Reputation by Lex Croucher, sorry. This is from 2021, so it's more recent, but it is set in the Georgian period. So a quote on the front said, "It's as if Bridgerton and Fleabag had a book baby." I haven't watched Bridgerton or Fleabag, so I don't know how true that is, but that is probably true. The actual acknowledgement in the front says, "For Jane Austen, sorry Jane." And I think that apology was justified, because this is not Jane Austen. I mean, for one thing, it's like a lot longer than Pride and Prejudice was. Jane Austen could do a lot more with a lot less space. It's hard to not compare it to Jane Austen, especially when she references Jane Austen right at the beginning of the book in the acknowledgements. It just comes up short to Jane Austen, which I guess a lot of authors would, but I just think I don't quite get it, because it's still set in the Georgian period, but the way people talk and certain things and mannerisms seem very contemporary, and I guess that was purposeful, but then I don't quite get where we're supposed to be with it. It's hard to know how accurate it's all supposed to be. One of the characters is black, and at the back of the book she does actually talk about how the story portrays a multicultural Regency Britain. Oh, it's Regency rather than Georgian. I apologise. And so she is, so I guess the point she makes at the back that it is actually accurate that there are characters of colour, but then it wasn't really that I thought wasn't accurate. It was more just like some of the language choice and stuff didn't really work for me. So it's called Reputation, and I mean, what have I written down? So the characters didn't seem super believable to me. They also almost all of them seemed horrible, or just like really unpleasant people that you would never want to spend time with. The main character is supposed to be like fairly straight-laced until she falls in with like the wrong crowd, I guess, except that she's basically quite happy to get completely drunk like the first second that she meets them, which is, you know, not deemed socially acceptable, but she doesn't seem to care that much. And then she keeps sort of suggesting that she's shocked by their behaviour initially, but then she kind of just goes along with it pretty happily immediately. I don't know, it's a bit like, I don't know, like I said, none of the characters really seemed that believable to me, and I think it's supposed to be examining the different way that men and women were treated based on their behaviour. So women would get a reputation that men would not, but I just don't know that it really like works all the way through. Like the plot doesn't fully work for me, and also like it should have ended about 50 plus pages sooner than it did, because it just felt like it ended and then it ended again and then it kept ending and it just wouldn't stop. It's like she really wanted to tie up all the loose ends. That's really what happened at the end, was like a lot of loose ends got tied up, which meant that actually there was no problem with the women's reputations, so it undermined what I thought was the point of the book. Anyway, I'm rambling again. Moving on to a much better book. This is After You'd Gone by Maggie O'Farrell. So I read The Hand That First Held Mine and thought it was amazing, and that's by Maggie O'Farrell. So I decided to try this one. This one is not as good, but it was her debut novel from the year 2000, and so for a debut I think it's really an excellent one. It moves backwards and forwards in time, but it is about one main character, Alice Rakes, who steps out in front of traffic and ends up in a coma, and then it's looking at like what happened that led up to that point, and it shifts from a couple of different people's characters' perspectives, but it mostly stays with her. There's her relationship with her husband, and also her mother's relationship with another man, and we kept kind of moving between the two stories, and I didn't quite, apart from the fact that they're both connected to the same main character, I didn't really fully understand what they had to do with each other. Like I didn't really understand why we were like, you know, I don't know, it didn't tie up at the end. I wasn't sure about the ending. The ending didn't quite work for me. Whereas The Hand That First Held Mine was a similar thing, where it was set in two quite distinctive different time periods, two what seemed like unrelated stories, but then obviously as you knew that as we were getting close to the end they were going to come together, and then they did clearly like join together. These two stories seemed more connected at first, but then I didn't understand why we were getting them both together. So I don't know. But still a good book. And then the last book that I've read recently is The Tennis Party by Sophie Kinsella, who's better known for the Shopaholic books. I only thought there was one because they made a film out of it, but there is not. There is The Secret Dream World of a Shopaholic, Shopaholic Abroad, Shopaholic Ties the Knot, Shopaholic and Sister, and Shopaholic and Baby. Kind of thought that she would get cured of her shopaholism at the end of the first book, but clearly not. I haven't read it, I don't know. This is when she wrote this, so this is from 1995, and so she wrote this as Madeleine Wickman, which apparently it says in the beginning is actually her real name, and then she wrote the Shopaholic books under a different name. This book is just rubbish. It's just rubbish. Don't bother reading it. You can tell from the cover, it's just rubbish. That's it. Those are the books that I've read recently. This was quite rambly, even though I said I was going to whiz through. I hope it made some kind of sense. Leave me a comment, a like, and a subscribe for more. Any suggestions for books as well would be greatly appreciated. See you next time.